In this tutorial, we're going to explore the use of custom brushes within the sculpting tool. We'll start by looking at how to make a custom brush where we'll save it and use it for sculpting to get us started. Then we'll look at how we can create a sculpted composition like the one that you can see here. So let's go to File, Close. So we'll start by creating a new file. So in here we're going to work with a single-sided job that has a width of 10 inches, height of 10 inches, thickness of 3/4 of an inch. Set our XY datum position to the lower left hand corner, and we're going to set our modelling resolution to be very high. Once we're happy, we'll go ahead and press OK. To start, let's have a look at the basics of this powerful tool. To help get started, we've included a set of pre-made brushes that are available to use right away. So we go to our Modelling tab and use this option here to import a component or a 3D model. Here you can see we've got a set of 20 brushes that we've created for you, and you can locate them by going to your Public, Documents, Vectric files, and then into the Sculpting brushes, and that's where these brushes are actually housed. Okay, so these brushes have been modelled in the software and they've just been exported out as a component brush for us to use with the sculpting tool. And we're going to use some of these brushes shortly throughout this demonstration. So let's start by creating some new brushes. So to help us stay organised, let's just rename this layer. We're going to call this one Brush 1. Okay, and then we'll just accept that and then just click into our 2D view. So we're going to look at creating our first brush using the Create Shape tool. So that requires us to have a closed vector. We're also going to make use of the feature where we can create a custom profile. So we're required to create another vector that represents that profile. So let's go and do that. We'll jump over to the Drawing tab. I'm going to start by creating a circle. So this is going to represent our actual brush kind of outline shape. Okay, so there's our circle. Next up, we need to create a cross section. So we're going to use the polyline tool here. I'm going to make use of my guides here, or my snapping guides here. And if you just snap to the center there, I'm just going to pull that up like so. I'm going to click. And I would like to create a sort of stepped shape. So I'm just going to bring that out a little, drop that down, bring that out, drop that down again, bring that out, and then drop that down in line with our start point there. So we click that in place and then right click to come out. There's our vector. So let's just tweak that a little bit with our node editing tool. So going to node edit mode. You can also press N on the keyboard to access node edit mode. Okay, I'm just going to highlight these two nodes. I'm just going to bring them down a little. I'm going to take these ones, bring those down a little also. I might take this one, just nudge that over to the right. Okay, whilst remaining in node edit mode, I'd like to smooth this point here. So right click and use the smooth option. And then if we just zoom in on that vector, I'm just going to bring that down. You can see I'm just following that line given to me there, which is really handy from the smart snapping options. Okay, right click, smooth point, and again, let's just bring that down. Shortcut key to smooth a node, press S on the keyboard, and again, let's just drag that in like so. So now I've got a nice smooth shape with all of these kind of rounded parts. Right, and let's just go back into normal selection mode. Press F to fit that to our screen. Now we have the two vectors that we need to create our shape. So let's go and tile our windows vertically. So we've got 2D view on the left, 3D view on the right. We'll go into the Modelling tab and then into the Create Shape form. Okay, so we're going to select our outer vector as the actual brush shape, followed by Shift, where we're going to select this vector, which is our custom vector. So we need to select this option here from within our profile selection choice. Okay, we're going to set that to no limit, and we're just going to call this one Stepped Round Brush, like so, and then we'll go ahead, press apply, and we can see the result of that there and see what that looks like. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So let's just close out here. Okay, so we're going to take this shape or component, we're going to right click and we're actually going to duplicate it. Okay, then we're going to right click and we're going to rename this one and we're going to call this one dash 0.5. And we'll just click to come out there. I'm just going to undraw the visibility of this one, and then for this duplicate that we've got here, we're going to go into the properties and we're just going to alter the shape height to 0.5, which is why we named it 0.5 in there. So you can see now it's much more shallow, and then we can simply close out, put that in C. So now we've got two brushes. We've got one that's really shallow and I've got another one that has a height of 5.8737. It's got the full height in there. And when we create a custom brush, the aspect ratio of the brush actually remains the same as you create it. So if you use a low Z height component, it will not appear very strong when sculpting. And so the strength of the brush really depends on the actual depth of the brush that we make, which is why we've got two examples here, one that's fairly flat and one that's full of height. And we're just going to look at how the two relate when we come to sculpt with them. So let's save these components out as sculpting brushes. So to do that, we simply go over to our component, right click, and then use this option here, save as sculpting brush. And so in the project folder, we're just going to name that stepped round brush, and then we'll go ahead and press save. We'll undraw the visibility of that component, switch on the other one, right click, save as sculpting brush. And then again, in the same project folder here, we're going to put that in, go ahead and press save. Okay, so we've got our brushes saved out. So what we're going to do is we're going to undraw the visibility of both of the components here. We're going to maximize our 3D view, then we're going to look at sculpting. Okay, so we're seeing this message because we don't actually have a component to sculpt with. We haven't got one visible or selected. So what the software is doing there is it's going to create a blank new component there for us. So we'll just go ahead and press OK. So in order for us to access our component brushes, we need to be either in the deposit or the remove tool. To access our component brushes, simply check this box here and that will enable us to use this option here to load in our brush. And so if we click on that, that will open up our folder, and here we can locate our custom brushes. So we're going to take the stepped round brush here and we'll go ahead and press open, and we can see we've got a handy graphic here that represents the actual brush shape that we're going to use. We have various options to control the brush. We've got various options to adjust the diameter, the strength and smoothness, and we're going to look at all of these options throughout this tutorial. So let's just go and take a look at how this brush will behave. So we're going to just increase the diameter. For the strength, we'll just put that down a little, and I'm just going to have 0 smoothness here. Okay, and then if I bring my cursor over into the 3D view, I'm not actually pressing anything yet, but we're able to see the actual the brush stroke, how that will look, and that you can see is actually a replica of the actual brush itself. So it takes on the form of the shape of your actual brush. Okay, so all I need to do is just simply click, and you'll see that it will create the actual brush stroke there. Okay, so this is kind of what I call the stamping effect. You can also kind of glide across. Okay, now taking a look at that doesn't really give us a useful shape. So if we just go into the twiddle view and we'll just go across, we can see what is actually happening here. So this is very unuseful at the moment. So at the moment, when we're stamping our brush, it's currently adding, okay? And if I just stamp over what I've already done, you'll see that we actually create more height because we're just stamping and adding on top of what we've already created. Now, if you didn't want to do that, or you didn't want that to happen, then you could look at using the merge option. So let's just go back into our deposit tool and we'll make use of the merge option here. And so what that does is when we click, and if I click again, you'll see that there isn't much difference being made, if any at all. And that's because we're constantly creating a new stamp of our brush, but it's actually blending in with the pixels of the previous brush stroke, so that then when we create glides like this, we're able to get something more useful, more of what we were actually expecting to see when we kind of glided that across. When you are using the brush strokes within the sculpting tools for the custom brush item, you can actually look at restricting your movements so that they're constrained to either like a horizontal or vertical movement. So to do that, if we simply put this in our Z view, and then what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and we're just going to undo some of the shapes that I've already created, just to create a little bit more space. So using Control Z to do that there. Okay, so with our brush ready here, all we do is press H and that will keep us constrained horizontally like so. Now we can do that again over here. To do the same but vertically, we simply hold down the V key on our keyboard, and then as we move our mouse down, you can see we're getting nice straight lines there. And this is all dependent on the actual view that you're looking at the actual model in plane. So at the moment we are looking down, straight down directly on the Z view, but if we, for example, if we just twiddled our view and just put that on a bit of a tilt, we'll get a different result, as it's all to do with the actual camera view that we're looking at this at. So for example, if we go back in here to our deposit, press H, you can see what we get here, and then if we press V, okay, you can see that's a little bit different. So if you want lines that are kind of perfectly straight across and up and down, you want to put that in the Z view so you get that effect there. So now let's take a look at some of the effects of the diameter, strength and smoothness settings. Okay, so again, let's just go in here and we're just going to Control Z, what we've just done, to create some room here. Okay, so diameter is currently at 301, so it's at its maximum. Okay, we can adjust the diameter by using the slider here to make that smaller, like so. Alternatively, you could use the right arrow key to increase your diameter, and we can see the preview of that here in the 3D view. Just simply let go wherever you like that. And alternatively, you could also use the scroller of your mouse wheel as well. So scroll away from you, gives you a bigger brush, scrolling towards you just decreases that diameter. Okay, then we move on to the strength here. Okay, so the strength of the brush depends on the Z depth of the brush that we actually make. And we're going to look at a comparison of the two brushes that we made earlier, and we'll see the effects of that shortly. But we can still adjust the strength of our component brush. So to do that, again, we can just use the slider. So at the moment, this is our strength at 29. We can increase that to 100, and you can see we've got a much stronger brush stroke there. And then we can decrease that over here, and you can see we have a much lighter brush. Okay, so some shortcut keys. If you press the up arrow on your keyboard, that's going to increase your strength slider. And if you press the down arrow key on your keyboard, that's going to decrease the strength on the actual slider there. So now let's take a look at the smoothness setting. Okay, so currently we have the smoothness at 1, and so when we click, this is what we get. Okay, now if we increase that smoothness, let's say we increase it to 100, we get this result. And if we just go into our twiddle tool, you'll see, I mean, even just from looking down the Z view, you can see they're actually very, very different effects there. Okay, and if we just take a look over here, you can see actually we have more of a point at the top, where everything is kind of sloping down in comparison to the original where it's kind of maintained the original brush look. And the smoothness in the component brushes is just a linear fall off from the center of the brush to the actual edge of the component. So when we apply smoothness, the center point will remain at the actual set height, and the heights will be reduced as you get further away from the center, so it creates this sloped effect. And so if we just show a comparison of us actually dragging with that, so over here with our smoothness at 100, we can see that there, and then with our smoothness at 0, we can see what that looks like over here as well. And so if you wanted to maintain the original shape, set your smoothness to 0. If you do want to create this smooth fall over, then you want to increase your smoothness as well. In addition to that, we actually have the option to apply further smoothness to your brushes. So if you go back into the deposit tool, okay, and if we just set that to halfway here, and then, or even actually, let's just increase that to 100. And then if we hold down Control, you can see that we've got this extra material here. And if we just do that to 0, again, you can see we've got that extra smoothness that's been added there as well. Okay, so that's lots of different options there to control the diameter, strength and the smoothness of our brushes. Okay, so our next example now, we're going to look at the other brush and show you the difference in strength. So let's just discard everything we've got here. We'll just press yes, and then we're going to go into our deposit tool. Okay, so we're just going to set the diameter to kind of maximum here. We'll go with the strength of around 60, smoothness of 1. And we're just going to just stamp that in and then hold down H. We're just going to bring that in like so. Okay, now we're going to load in our other brush. Okay, so our other brush of 0.5, we're going to open that up. Okay, so here we can see the graphic. So straight away we can see the graphic is actually a little bit different. It's representing that more of a flat shape in there. And then here if we click, you can see it's maintained the exact same settings that we used previously for the other brush. And if we hold down H and then drag that along, you can see we get a much different effect down to the actual, the strength and the actual height of the component that we've used. And so the strength of the brush is very much dependent on the Z depth of the actual brush that we make. So we had more Z depth in this brush, and so at these settings we get much more defined brush. The shallower component that we used, again, same settings, a much shallower representation of that brush as well. So it's just something for you to be mindful of when you are creating your brushes to begin with. Okay, so next up we're going to look at use dynamic rotation. We're going to create a brand new brush to demonstrate this with. So let's just cancel out here, just press yes. We don't want to keep those changes, so that's fine. I'm going to go into the 2D view, and if we just press F to fit that to our screen, we'll go to our layers bar at the top here. We're going to add in a new layer. We're going to call this one brush 2, and then we're just going to undraw the visibility of brush 1. Make sure brush 2 layer is the active layer, and then into the drawing tab, I'm going to go into the polyline tool, just going to draw a line, and we're going to draw it back on itself, snap to the start point, right click to come out, and then here I'm going to click it, N for node edit mode, B to turn that into a Bezier curve, where we're just going to bring that up like so, and then B to bring that down, and we're just going to drag this down also over here. Let's just snap that to the center there. Okay, so actually what I want to do is I just want to take those nodes, just make that a bit more of a shallower shape. Okay, so something like that looks perfect. So let's just tile our windows. We're going to take that vector into the modeling tab, into our create shape form. This time we're going to use this smooth profile. Set that to no limit. We'll just give that a name. We'll call this one brush 2, and then we'll go ahead and press apply. and then close out. And there is our new shape that we have there. We can see that in our component tree. Let's right click, use the option here to save a sculpting brush. We'll keep it named brush 2. Go ahead and press save. Then we'll just put that in the Z view. Okay, so let's just switch the visibility of the brush 2 off, and we'll just maximize our 3D view, and we'll go back into the sculpting tools. Okay, so this message has popped up because we actually have the brush selected, but the visibility of that is not on. So let's just click out there, and then we'll go into the sculpting. We'll just create a brand new component there. And then in the deposit, let's go and use a component brush, and we'll load in a brush. We'll take that brush 2, and then we'll go ahead and press open. Okay, and again, you can see the kind of the ghost of our cursor is the same shape as the actual brush that we've created. Okay, and again, just show you an example. We can use that to stroke that along. Okay, so here let's just set that to merge, and then we'll just go ahead and we'll just undo what we've just done there. So just Control Z that, and then we'll do this, and you can see here you can create a nice effect. You can adjust the diameter again, and here this one could make nice clouds, for instance. And so we are actually just kind of limited at the moment to the actual shape direction of our brush. If we wanted to move that, for example, if we wanted to go down, we can create this effect. But what if we wanted to actually change it so that this brush actually changes direction? Well, we can do that. So if you press the R key on your keyboard, and then using the scroller of your mouse, moving away from you actually rotates this clockwise like so, and then we can let go and we can go in this motion. Scrolling towards you just makes that in an anti-clockwise motion, and again we can do that as well, and again we can do that over here, so like so. You can also make use of the actual slider as well, so whilst we're actually rotating that manually, it's actually updating that angle over here. Okay, and then obviously you can use the option here to actually type in precise values if we wanted to, and it would do that for us as well. Okay, now we've got a bit messy now, so let's just kind of discard all of those changes there. Now, what if we wanted to actually maintain the rotation in line with how we're moving the mouse? Well, we can do that by using the dynamic rotation option. So we'll switch that on, and over in the 3D view you can see now we've got this red arrow above the ghost of our component brush, and this arrow basically represents the top of our component brush when we modelled it, and this is the direction which it's going to brush in line with our movements. And so now what we can do is when we move our brush, you can see I'm kind of going down and up, and it's following the movements in line with how I'm actually moving the mouse there, and we've got quite a nice effect. However, it wasn't what I was quite expecting, and that's because the top of the brush is in the direction that will be forwards, and we can see that that's going to the left here. So what we need to do to adjust that is to actually alter the actual rotation of our brush. So let's go and do that. So we're just going to cancel out. I'm just going to discard all of this. That's fine. We'll just switch on brush 2, and we're going to take that. Okay, and then we're just going to press 9 on the keyboard, and that's going to rotate that in increments of 45 degrees. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to right click on our brush, and we're going to say save as sculpting brush. This time we'll call this one brush 3, and then we'll press save. So now the top of the brush will be up here. So then if we just undo the visibility of that brush, go back into the sculpting tools, and then here if we use a component brush and load in our brush, we can load in brush 3, and then with the dynamic rotation and merge switched on, we can see the arrow is now at the top of our ghost component there. And so this is our forwards direction, which you can see creates some interesting results. Now it's worth noting that because this is a long thin brush, we're actually prone to this spiky effect when turning around sharp corners, which in this instance is actually quite an interesting shape, but the reality of it is that you probably would want to avoid long thin shapes like this when sculpting corners or when you sculpt back on itself like we've got here. And so when you want to use a brush to dynamically sculpt into corners and sharp turns, then it's best to use a brush that has a similar length and width as opposed to the one we're using here where it's long and thin, to help avoid the effect that we can see here. And so if we go back and we choose the stepped round shape, and now if we run into the corners, we don't see that spiky effect, and that's down to the shape that we're actually working with. Now it's worth noting that if you do like the setting, the diameter, strength, smoothness setting for a particular brush, or whether it's just one of the standard brushes that come with the software, you do have the ability to save that as a preset. Okay, and so what you can do is you can add it. So for example, we can say stepped brush in here. And then we can go ahead and press OK, and it will appear in our drop down list so that when we open a future instance of the software, and if we wanted to use those exact same settings, those settings can be saved within our presets and they'll always be there when you open the software, which is really useful for saving out settings that worked really well. So now that we've learned the basics of creating brushes and how we can use them, let's take a look at creating a composition with some of the brushes that actually come with the software. So let's just cancel out here. We'll just remove all of that. And we're going to go into the 2D view and we're just going to go and add in a new layer, and we're going to call this one Duck Frame, and we're going to turn off brush 2, make sure Duck Frame is our active layer. Press F to fit that to our screen. We'll go into the drawing tab. We're going to draw the vectors we need for our frame. So using the polyline tool, just going to draw a line that goes down like this, and right click out of the polyline tool there. And then with that selected, press Ctrl Shift H to create a copy horizontally. And then we're going to take another polyline here, and we're actually going to just go across like so. I'm going to press Ctrl Shift V to create a copy vertically as well. So we've got the vectors that we need for the main rails of our frame. So now we need to look at creating a cross section for our frame, where we can use that with the extrude and weave tool to create that frame. So we're going to use the ellipse tool here. So in here, we're just going to draw a shape out, something that looks like that. We'll close out into node edit mode by pressing N on the keyboard, and we'll just D to delete that span and D to delete that span also. Okay, so if we just tile our windows, we're going to go into the modeling tab and we're going to go into the extrude and weave tool. We're going to select the vectors that we want to extrude our profile into. We're going to use the option here, use selection. I'm going to go through this form very quickly. However, if you would like to learn more about the extrude and weave modeling tool, then you can find the video linked in with this tutorial in the actual description. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll just use that as our rails. Okay, next up we need to select our cross section, whereby we're going to use a vector cross section, and we're going to weave over and under at the crossings. We're going to have a weave under here of 30, and we're going to have a weave over of 120, whereby we're going to use the actual base option here. Okay, so let's just kind of reset that there. So 30 there, and then 120 on the base. And then we can give that a name. So we're just going to call this one frame. And then we'll go ahead and press apply, and we can see the effect of that there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Okay, so we'll just close out there. So we've got our frame. So next up, we're going to now look at creating more of our composition. So we want to create the internal areas that's going to sit within our frame. So here we're just going to take our vectors, okay, and we're going to shift and select those vectors and our cross section here, and we're just going to right click and say move to layer, new layer, and we're just going to call this one frame vectors, and we can just undraw the visibility of that and go ahead and press OK. Okay, so we're just going to delete these components. We don't need them anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to look at creating a composition within the frame. So we're going to go over to our clip art tab. We're going to take a look at the clip art we've got, and we're going to create a scene. So if you go into the animals option here, you can see all of the clip art that we have available for us to download. Some of them we have already downloaded, for example this duck here. If we double click on that, you can see that can then come into our software. We can see that in the 2D view as well as the 3D view as well. And the idea is I'd like to create a scene where the duck is kind of swimming over a lake or some water. So let's first just size up the duck so it sits within the actual frame. Okay, so something like that looks okay. Maybe we'll nudge it up a little bit. And then we're just going to create a component that just basically represents a very basic version of the actual water. So if we go into the drawing tab, and if we just use the draw rectangle tool, we're just going to just kind of draw something that looks like that, and then we can close out. And then with that vector, let's go into the modeling tab and we'll go in and create a shape. So we'll just use a rounded shape here, set that to merge. We'll just call this one water, press apply, and so that looks like. Okay, very bulbous shape here. We need to really reduce that down. So we'll use the scale to exact height option here, whereby we can input a height. Okay, so you can see the result of that there, because that's not too bad. Okay, so it's got a nice flat shape. That looks all right, to be fair. So we'll go with that, and then we'll go ahead and press apply. So now that we've got the water, and then we just close out. Now we've got our water in there, we can now start to think about creating the actual sculpt version of our frame. So we're going to go in and we're going to take our frame to begin with, and we're going to go into the sculpting tools. Okay, so which is maximize our 3D view. So even though we're actually sculpting on the frame, we're able to see the full model here, and that's because we've got show full model switched on. And if we switch that off, we can see that it's not displayed. But in most cases, it's actually quite handy to actually have that showing, so you can see the result of anything that you overlap with this and see live how it actually interacts with the rest of the model, even though we're actually only sculpting on the component that we selected before we came into this form. So we're going to actually look at applying a texture to our frame. So we want to give it a kind of bark texture. So we're going to go into the deposit tool, where we're going to use the component brush option. We'll load in a brush. And then from our folder, let's just locate our 3 sculpting brushes here, and you can see we've got them all visible here. Now we're going to take this bark component, and then we'll just go ahead and press open. Okay, and we can see what that looks like here. We can make that bigger if we wanted to, or smaller, just using the scroll of my mouse as we demonstrated earlier. Okay, so then what we could do is we could apply this stamping effect to the actual frame to create a bark look. Now you can see that we're really able to see that we're actually just stamping the same component on here, and that's because we've currently got this set to add. It's added on top of our model. Now if we actually use the merge option, it's going to add on top, but it's going to merge with itself. Okay, so let's just discard what we've done there, like so, and then this time we're going to use the merge option. And so now when we come in and actually stamp, you can see that we're not adding on top of the actual stamps themselves. Even though we're adding on top of our composite model, we're actually merging in with each other, and that's creating a real nice natural look for us. So we'll just carry on here and we'll go to the bottom over here. Now you're probably thinking, why isn't this brush actually sculpting into that modelling plane? And that's because we've got preserve transparency switched on. So it's just ensuring that we don't go into anywhere outside of our component. But obviously if you wanted to do that, then you just simply turn that option off and you're able to do so. Okay, so we're just going to go over this just very carefully, just putting more effects in there like so. And if we wanted to rotate it again, let's press the R key, use that scroller, and we can do that. So this time I'm going to go over horizontally like this, and you can see that just by using this stamp we're actually creating a really nice log frame effect here, which, you know, looks pretty good. Okay, and then we'll just go along the bottom as well. So again, do that. I've actually missed the top there, so let's just rotate that again. So using R and the scroller. There we have it, that looks pretty good. We go into the twiddle view, we can take a look at how that looks. Awesome. Okay, so now that I'm happy with that, we're just going to go ahead and OK that. I'm just going to come out there. So next up, what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at sculpting in some of the water, and I might just adjust the layout ever so slightly. So for the water, let's just take that, I might just stretch it up a little bit like so. And then for the duck, might just make that a little bit lower. Okay, so we could just bring that down, kind of like that there. And then if we just have a look over here, might want to just increase the shape there, so lift that out a little bit. Okay, we'll put that in Z, and then we're going to take the water component here and we're going to go into the sculpting tools. We're going to look at sculpting in that water. Okay, so for this, again, we're going to use a component brush. So let's go into the deposit tool. We're going to use the component brush option here. We're going to load in a brush, and if we take a look at some of the options that we have, we've got one here called water, so we'll take that one and we'll go ahead and press open. And this time we're actually going to look at using the dynamic rotation option here, so we'll just switch that on, and we'll also ensure that we set this to merge. Okay, and then we can see what this looks like. So the arrow at the top there represents the direction. So the moment I start moving my mouse across, it's going to go kind of flip 90 degrees for us. And then hopefully that will give us the nice kind of wavy effect that we're after. Now, if you wanted to, you could just turn off the full model, so we just have focus on this. It's really dependent on how you want to view this. So let's just do this without for now. And then we can just go in there like so. Then we can bring that back round again. And you can see we're just creating a very subtle waves here, which is exactly what we want there, just to give us that kind of realistic water effect there. And again, we can just kind of go in if we wanted to add a little bit more. Okay, so let's just put the full model on and we'll take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. Next up, what I'd like to do is I'd like to add some grass or reeds at the bottom of the actual frame here, well, in front of the water. So to do that, let's just go into load brush. We've got some grass here, so we can take grass 3 and then we'll go ahead and press open. Okay, I'm actually going to turn off dynamic rotation off here, and we're going to look at stamping the grass along the bottom. Okay, we're going to keep full model switched on just so we can see what that looks like against the whole model. So using the R key and the scroll of a mouse, we're just going to get this in the correct orientation, and then what we could do is we could just go in and we could start stamping. Now, you didn't really see much there. You can see that a little bit here, but that's because we're merging in with our current model, which is the water. Okay, so what we want to do is we actually want to switch off the merge here, and then when we add that in, you can see it's actually making more of an impact because we're actually adding on top of the water. Okay, and then we could just go across like so, and you can see that it's really nice actually having the full model on because we're able to see that, but whatever changes we make to our model, we're not actually affecting the rest of the components that aren't currently within the sculpt that we're doing here, which is really nice. Okay, so I actually quite like what we've got there. Maybe I'll just make that a little bit bolder. And that looks pretty good. So you can see we've got the grass effects there. Maybe add a bit more at the top there. We could add some grass at the top here, but I don't want to add grass. What I would like to do is I'd like to look at adding in some trees. So if we go back into our brush option here, we do have a tree. Okay, so we're going to open that up, and I'd like to put some trees in the background. So we're going to kind of create the kind of depth of field here. So we've got the grass right at the front, we've got the sea, and then in the background we want the trees right at the end, the other side of our lake scene. Okay, so we're just going to shrink that down a little bit. Okay, so you can see it's really handy having that kind of brush shape because we can see exactly where we're going to be stamping that in, and we're just going to shrink that down a little bit more, and we'll just go ahead and stamp. Okay, so it hasn't done anything apart from the right at the bottom there, and that's because it's just latched onto the overlap of the water. In order for us to actually stamp into the actual background here, we need to use this option, preserve transparency, and actually switch it off. Okay, so then when we go ahead and click, we're actually now sculpting into our modeling plane, and that's then going to be included into our component. Okay, so we'll just shrink the next one down, and you can see with each one what we're doing here is we're just creating that composition. Now, if we wanted to, we could like move on over to the right hand side, and we'll just put in a smaller tree perhaps there, like so. Maybe we'll create a little bit of a gap this time just to break it up. Maybe we'll make a bigger tree by just clicking in there. And we'll add in some more trees over to the right. So again, let's just kind of create that depth of field by just kind of adjusting the size of our trees there. Okay, so that's not too bad. So then what we can do is we can look at how well we've done that by just zooming in. Okay, so you can see we've got a bit of a gap here. So really when we're doing this, we should probably go in a little bit closer, which is not a problem because we can kind of rectify that just using the standard sculpting tools. So let's go and do that now. So we're just going to actually undraw the option here to show the full model, and here we're just going to come right in there, and now what we can do is we can go into our smudge tool. I'm going to shrink that right down a little bit and just decrease our strength, and we're just going to kind of just blend that into our scene. Okay, I'm actually just going to undo that change there, and now I'm going to use this option here to preserve the transparency, so anything that we do change, it doesn't actually get affected by the actual overall composition. Okay, so just going to do that there. I'm also going to look at sculpting in the top bit of the water here. We're just going to try and pull that up just so we get a bit more of a distinctive line at the top there. Okay, so again, I'm just going to push that material up like so. We're just really just trying to remove where the actual two kind of join in. Okay, so just again, push all of that up like so. So I'm just clicking and pushing. So the smudge tools enable us to actually go ahead and do that. So here, I'm just going to push like so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into the twiddle mode, hold down Control, and again let's just go over here and just smudge that out over here. And then in order for us to actually bring in some of that detail again, let's just use the deposit tool. We're going to put a 0 strength in here, and we're going to undraw the preserve transparency. And actually what we want to do is we don't want to use a component brush here, but we want to just use a standard brush. Okay, and we're just going to add in, we just undo that there, just add in that detail like so, and then we're going to switch the preserve transparency on again, and then using our smudge tool, just going to smudge that down, move that across like so. That down and smudge that up, and down and smudge that up again. Okay, and then if we wanted to, we could just use a twiddle tool, zoom out, we could take a look. What we've got there, it's not looking too bad. Again, we can use that smudge tool and just kind of scratch that out a little bit. That's looking pretty good. So we've put that twiddle mode there, and then we'll just press F to turn on the full model, and then we'll use the Z option just to fit that to our screen. And then we'll go ahead and press OK to save our changes. Okay, so next up what I'd like to do is add a little bit of detail to the duck itself. So if that's selected, let's go into the sculpting tools. Okay, we're going to use the deposit tool, but before we do that, let's just use the twiddle tool just to zoom in onto our duck. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to use the deposit tool, use a component brush, load a brush, and here we've got one called Fine Feathers. We're going to look at using the dynamic rotation here. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to apply just very small strokes just to create a little bit more detail in the wings, just to create more of the kind of feathered look in there. Okay, so you can see at the moment I've got a strength of 1, so we're just going to increase that ever so slightly. We'll see what this looks like before we kind of work with it, and then we'll just go ahead. So we're not going to set this one to merge. I want it to just kind of add with each other, just to create more of the kind of feathered effect. Right then, so just going to go down. Okay, you can see it's not looking too bad. Okay, if there's something that you didn't like, you could always press undo by using Control Z. So I'm just going to go back a few strokes there, maybe one more. Okay, like that. The beauty of Control Z is that you can always undo any unnecessary, unwanted strokes in your project. Okay, so that looks pretty good. You can see we've got quite a good amount there. Now I'm actually going to just decrease the strength ever so slightly, just by 1 notch. And then we're going to come over here, and we're also going to add in the feathers over here, and perhaps we'll add in a little bit underneath there, and perhaps just a little bit over here. And you can see already it's looking a lot better. We've got a lot more detail in there. So at this stage we'll go ahead and press keep, and then we could go and OK that to come out there. Okay, so often when we're creating compositions, it's very much an iterative process of reviewing your work, seeing what you like about it, then making changes, and that's exactly what I want to do right now. So here I don't actually like the water here. I think it's quite flat and still, so I'm going to go back into the sculpting tools, but first we must select the water component. Into the sculpting tools, deposit, use a brush, load a brush, let's select that water. We'll go in and press open. Just going to decrease that strength ever so slightly, and then we're just going to start sculpting. I actually want the dynamic rotation switched on here. Okay, so you can see I just want to add in a little bit of movement. That's all I want to do here. You can see we're actually getting that just by creating these little strokes here. Nothing too drastic, but we're actually creating a little bit of movement there in the water. So I really like what we've got there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and press keep. Now another thing I'd like to do is I'd like to actually add in a little bit of grass in here into the corners, just so it's not such a harsh line where the water's edge actually meets the surface of the trunks of the trees. So again, let's load in a brush, and we're going to go into the grass there. We'll go ahead and press open. Okay, I do not want dynamic rotation here, so we're going to use the R key and the scroller of our mouse. Okay, and here what we're going to do is we're just going to, and I'll also look at going into the background as well. So we're just going to just roughly press that in place. Perhaps we could increase the strength there. Okay, so actually gonna, okay, that's a little bit too much, so let's just discard what we've done there. We'll do that. Okay, so you'll see that my water's still the same. That's because we use that keep option. So now what we can do is go back and try and make the changes that we want there. So in there, we're just gonna create a little bit, as if we've got kind of a corner going on here, like the river bank or of the lake. Okay, so just kind of taking that over like so. You can see it's actually working really well here. Okay, so I like what we've got there, so we'll do the same over this side as well. So again, all I'm doing is I'm just kind of clicking that into position, go into underneath the actual frame there. Okay, and you can see we're actually we're channeling this into the kind of center of our job, so it looks like, you know, that we've got a depth perception here, where we can actually see the kind of direction of the lake itself. Okay, kind of just bring that back over here like so. I don't actually like what we've done there, so I'm going to just press Control Z again and just kind of remove that just over there. Okay, so somewhere like that. Okay, and we'll just kind of touch on that again over here. And as I mentioned earlier, the sculpting and all this kind of artwork is very much an iterative process, and it's subjective as well. So sculpt as much or as little as you like. Okay, so we've kind of got the gist there. Okay, so it doesn't look too bad. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and press keep, and then we'll go ahead and OK that. Okay, so there we have our kind of composition here. Now if we want, we could look at perhaps nudging our duck up a little bit, so something like that. And you can see where it's actually green is where it's actually hidden underneath the water. Okay, so what we could do is we could look at raising our duck a little bit, so we could do that just straight from the 3D view here. So we could look at perhaps adding a little bit of a base height just to raise that up ever so slightly. Okay, just to lift that out, and you can see we've got much more of a defined shape there. Okay, so I really like what we've got here, so we'll just put that in Z. Okay, so to finish the composition, we're going to look at adding in some clouds and some birds. So let's take the water component. We'll go into the sculpting tools. We're going to go into the deposit tool. We're going to select our brush. So we've got a cloud brush here. Okay, we'll press open. We're going to use the dynamic rotation. We're also going to set it to merge. And we want to cut or sculpt into the background here. So we're going to use the preserve transparency option switched off. Okay, and we'll just decrease the strength there a little, and all we're going to do is we're just going to put in little hints of clouds like so. That's looking pretty good. Okay, if we wanted to, we could add a little bit more depth to them by kind of going on top of that. Okay, so I'm happy with what we've got there. So next up, what we could do is go into our brush, and we could go in and use the seagulls option. Okay, this time we do not want the dynamic rotation. We do not want merge either. We'd like to just kind of add on top of what we've got there. We'll use the R key like so, and then here we can just add in those birds. Again, use the R key just to rotate it, get some birds in the distance there. Okay, and then we'll just go over here, click to add that, and you can see it's looking pretty good. And then if you use the twiddle tool. You can take a look at that. Really happy with the composition there. So go ahead and press OK and then put that in Z. Okay, so we are currently viewing this with the shadow shading option on, which is very useful if you wanted to get the kind of shadow effect to see how your model would potentially look if it were cut. And you can access that from the view menu. So if we turn that off, we can see what that would look like without. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. Okay, so that really completes this tutorial. So let's go ahead and save this file. So go to File, Save As, and then in the project folder, we're going to call this one Custombrush Sculpting. And it's going to save that as a CRV3D file. Press Save, and then you can access that from the project folder.